This is the new 2023 Lexus RX 350, and it's the latest version of the Lexus RX. The RX is one of the most popular luxury SUVs on the planet, and now there's a new one, fully redesigned with some big upgrades over the old model. And today, I'm going to review it and show you all the quirks and features of the new Lexus RX. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this Tesla Roadster, which sold for just under $140,000. This fantastic Ford Bronco, lifted, modified, sold for just over $70,000. And this wonderful Aston Martin DB9 Volante, which brought just over $45,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. With daily auctions, great selection, and free listings, check it out at carsandbids.com. Alright, I'm going to start the quirks and features, the new RX, with getting in, where you'll instantly notice one difference compared to the old model. The new model's door handle is electronic. What I mean by this is you go to grab the handle, but instead of pulling on it, there's a little button on the inside. You press that and the door pops open electronically, which is interesting. Now, same deal on the inside, where you don't have a traditional door handle to get out. Instead, you have this, which looks like a door handle, but rather it's a button. You push on it and the door pops open electronically, and then you open it the rest of the way. Now, just in case you're anxious about this and worried you might get stuck inside your new RX if the electronic popper fails, there is a failsafe. You can also pull on this door handle button the opposite direction, and then it acts as a mechanical handle, sort of as a backup, so you can get out even if the electronic isn't working. But anyway, next up, climb inside the new RX, and the first thing you notice, especially if you're familiar with the old model, is it's very different in here. A little bit more relaxed, a little cleaner, a little bit simpler and more modern than the outgoing RX model. Definitely a totally redesigned interior in here. And probably the most obvious change comes to the center screen, which is massive. You can see this huge center infotainment screen here dominating the cabin and taking virtually all of your in-car functions into the screen. Now, this new infotainment system replaces the remote touch system that was in most of the old RX models. That system was terrible. You used a little mouse and controller to select things. It wasn't a touchscreen until the very end of production. It was just a disastrous system that didn't work. This replaces it, and it's much better. This new infotainment is fantastic, and I think a lot of people are going to like it. The main things I like about it: number one, very responsive to the touch. So you tap on it, there's no lag, there's no delay, it just does what you want, like you'd expect from a smartphone. It also is very intuitive. You don't have stuff buried in menus, hard to find. Everything's pretty easy to figure out where it is, and it's all relatively simple and easy. Now, with that said, there are a couple of drawbacks of this infotainment system. One is the fact that you can't do two things at once. In a lot of cars, you can have your navigation system on half the screen and your music on the other half, but not here. And that means if you want to change the song you're listening to, but the navigation system is directing you somewhere, you got to go off the map, go to the music, change the song, then go back to the map. And it's kind of disappointing you have to do that, especially with such a large screen. The other drawback of this infotainment system is that the 360-degree camera in this car is disastrous. You press the view button here to get a 360 view around the car, and this is all you get. This sort of egg-shaped view that takes up a small portion of the screen, and you cannot direct where it goes. You can't move it left, right, up, down like in most other cars. You can only pause it as it's moving around the car at its own pace. A disastrous 360 camera system. Not sure why they even bother, but that's what you have. Now, one thing I like about this infotainment system, the climate controls are integrated into the screen, which I usually complain about, but here they are always fixed in place. Regardless of what screen or menu you're on, the climate controls will always be where you expect them. This is nice. It allows Lexus to save some money instead of making little buttons for every climate function, and it allows you to always know where all your climate functions are since they never move. You also, with the climate controls, have this cool little wheel to change the climate temperature, and it displays the temperature inside the wheel on a screen, little red and blue background, which looks kind of cool and a little bit quirky. And by the way, speaking of quirky for the climate controls, one interesting item here is your car car probably has automatic climate control for the air temperature. Well, this has automatic climate control for the heated steering wheel and the heated and cooled seats. You can put those items in auto, and then the car itself will decide, hey, it's cold, turn on the heated steering wheel, so you don't have to lower yourself to pushing a button, since your car does that automatically for you. Now, that is quirky, but the rest of this car is not particularly quirky. Lexus isn't really known for doing anything totally out of the box or weird, and so there aren't that many quirks in this interior, but I did find a few, including the gear selector, which is rather odd. The way this works is you move this gear selector part over and down if you want to go into drive, or over and up if you want to go into reverse, or just over to the left if you want to go into neutral. Now, you can also select a manual mode if you're in drive and pull the gear selector down, and then you can manually shift using the paddles on the steering wheel. And if you want to go into park, this little P button in the gear selector area will do that. Now, Lexus and Toyota have been using this gear selector in various hybrid models for a while now, but this car isn't hybrid powered and it's incorporated here. Kind of unusual, but that's what it has. Next up on the quirk front, I love this center console lid. You can press a button, open it up, and then the driver has access, but the cool thing is you close it and the passenger can do the very same thing. Press a button and now they have access. It's openable from both sides equally, which is kind of a cool magic trick inside the new RX. Both passengers have easy access to the center console. And next up, also in this center vicinity, you have an off-road mode here. This little button shows a car with a tree and some rocks, and that puts your Lexus RX in off-road mode. And when you press that, an icon in the gauge cluster comes on showing the same thing, the tree and the rocks, for all the times you're going to off-road your RX, which is pretty much never. You might be wondering, what does the off-road mode do? I don't know, but I assume nothing. Next up, also quirky in this center console, you have cup holders here, of course, but the front cup holder can be adjusted. You press this little push button and the bottom of the cup holder rises up to accommodate different size cups. So you can choose exactly whether you want a taller cup or maybe a smaller cup or a mug, and you can adjust the cup holder size to correspond. And next up, another interesting quirk in here is that the rear view mirror is also a camera. You can see it's a mirror right now, but if I flip this switch, it becomes a camera showing what's behind you. More and more cars are offering this, so it's not that quirky or interesting, but one unusual piece here is that the camera is mounted inside the car. You can see it here mounted on the inside of the tailgate, which is unusual. Virtually every other car I've seen with this rear view camera as a mirror thing, they mount it outside, but the benefit here is that on a rainy day like this, your camera won't get obscured with water because it's inside the car, and so you can easily see behind you even if it's wet outside. Pretty cool idea. And next up, another interesting item in the new RX is over on the steering wheel. You can see there are areas of controls like you have in most cars, but here there are two sets of arrow buttons that have no labeling at all, no icons. So how do you know what they do? The answer is they do various things depending on what you're adjusting, and it all shows up in the heads-up display. So check this out. I'm going to adjust the adaptive cruise control system, and the heads-up display actually shows me what each little arrow button does as it relates to the adaptive cruise system. As I press the arrows, the car responds just like it says it would in the heads-up display, which is cool. But I go to a different menu, and now you can see it's showing me that the arrows have completely different functions that do different stuff, and this is all projected directly in front of me in the heads-up display, corresponding to what I'm actually changing. And it's the same deal over on the left side. The arrows have one function, as you can see, but then I press a menu button on the steering wheel, and now they have an entirely different function and different operation. Now, this is cool for a couple reasons. Number one, because it allows Lexus to have fewer overall buttons in here. The interior is not as cluttered because the same buttons can do different things. And it's also cool because it's projected directly in front of you. Rather than on the gauge cluster where you take your eyes off the road, you can see exactly what you're pressing and what it will do as you're looking at the road, which makes it safer. And that's a cool touch. And by the way, since we're talking about the steering wheel, let's discuss the driver assist technology, which you activate on the steering wheel. In this car, it's pretty good, which is to say that it will speed up, slow down based on traffic in front of you, and it goes around curves on the freeway. It's all pretty excellent, and it does a good job doing it. Also, the steering wheel is capacitive touch, meaning you don't have to jiggle the wheel to let it know you're paying attention. You can just rest your hand there and the car will drive, which is nice. The drawback of this system is the lane changing function. Technically, it offers it. Put on your turn signal and it will change lanes. But I found this system to be so conservative that it is essentially non-functional, non-usable. You put on your signal and it won't change lanes if there's a car like parked 3 miles away. It's a disaster, and it's not really usable as a result. You'll have to change your own lanes, but otherwise, the driver assist tech works well. But anyway, next we move on to the back seat in the new Lexus RX, and I have to say, it's reasonably roomy back here. Headroom could use a little bit more, another inch or two, but legroom, knee room, hip room, it's all pretty good back here, especially for a mid-size SUV in the RX's size. Decent space for rear passengers. Aside from that, not really much to talk about in the back seat. This is, after all, a new Lexus RX, not too many crazy new details, but you do have the same electronic door poppers back here that you had up front. Press the button and you can climb out. Other than that, nothing too surprising back here. You have a climate control feature, although really you can just change the temperature. You can't change the fan speed. The car will decide that for you. You also have a couple USB-C ports back here for charging, which is nice. And one tiny little drawback, the cup holder is integrated into the center armrest, meaning you can't have a cup holder if you have a middle passenger. So you have to choose between whether you want 3 people back here or whether you want cup holders. Not really a big deal though. A lot of cars do that, no real problem. And next up we move around to the back of the new RX. There are a few items to talk about. For one, this light bar that goes across the entire back end. Light bars are becoming more and more common in the car industry, and they have now made their way to Lexus and the new RX. More interestingly though, is the badging back here. Old RX and other Lexus models had the Lexus L emblem in back, but that's gone. They've replaced it with the Lexus script back here instead. No emblem, just Lexus. I guess maybe to increase their brand awareness or identity, or just to move in a more modern new direction, but it is interesting. But anyway, next up we move on to the cargo area in the new Lexus RX, and I have to say, nothing particularly interesting or unusual back here. Again, Lexus RX. There's not that many surprises with this vehicle. It's the 5th generation of the RX, and they figured out how to refine it to give us what we want without making any daring changes. So this is the cargo area, pretty standard stuff. One interesting item worth noting, you can put down the back seats from the cargo area. You press these little buttons over on the side and you can see the seats automatically fold down, which is nice to see. Now they're not power operated, meaning you can't fold them back up from the cargo area. You have to do that manually, but it's still nice to see seats that can fold down in the back of a mid-sized luxury SUV. That's not a feature you always get, but the new RX has it. And next up we move under the hood in the new RX, which is actually one of the most interesting parts about this car because there are 4 different engine options in the new RX. That's not something you often see in a mid-sized luxury crossover that's pitched to non-car enthusiasts. 4 different engine options, but there really is something for everyone with the new RX. So let's go through them. This is the RX 350, non-hybrid, and that's the base model. And I suspect it's going to be the majority of sales, the most affordable, best value model. It has a turbocharged 4-cylinder, about 275 horsepower, pretty good. Now, next up, you have the RX 350H, which is essentially a hybrid version of this exact vehicle, using the same powertrain, but hybrid. It's about 250 horsepower, and it comes standard with all-wheel drive. Now, from there, you can upgrade to the RX 450H Plus, and the Plus means that it's a plug-in hybrid model. Lexus hasn't announced full details about this for the US market, but in other markets, this car has around 300 horsepower and a fully electric range of about 40 miles before the gasoline powertrain kicks in and can take you further. So that is a plug-in hybrid version. It's not available yet, but it's coming soon. And then at the very top of the new Lexus RX range, there is a performance version, surprisingly. It's called the RX 500H, and it's a hybrid 4-cylinder, which doesn't sound very performance-y, but it has 367 horsepower and about 410 pound-feet of torque, which is pretty healthy numbers for a Lexus RX, and it's pretty quick. Lexus says 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds, 5.8, 5.9, 0 to 60 for a Lexus RX, so a little bit of a sporty version of this car offered as well, in addition to the standard model and the fuel-efficient versions. And finally, the last thing I want to discuss with the new RX is the design, the style, the way it looks. This is particularly important because I always felt that the old RX was really ugly, just not an attractive car. Too many creases and cuts and gouges, that massive grille, it just felt radically overstyled to me, and I never liked it. It never grew on me, but this new one is a lot better. Frankly, it looks a lot cleaner, more modern, simpler. They've gotten rid of a lot of the overstyled stuff. It's just a nicer looking, more modern, more attractive design for the new RX, going away from the ugly weirdness of before and back to a sort of more conventional and nice looking design. Now, one especially interesting change for the new RX is that the grille has actually gotten smaller compared to the outgoing model. Lexus has gotten a lot of criticism for its increasingly massive grilles, but they've made this one a little smaller, which suggests maybe they're going to go back to sort of more mainstream designs and not as ridiculously oversized grilles. Now, one interesting number with the new RX is that the overall length is 2.4 inches shorter than the outgoing model, but the wheelbase is 2.4 inches longer than the outgoing model. That means there's 2.5 more inches between the wheels, which means more passenger space, more room for occupants. The reason I bring this up now is that the old model was essentially wasting space with its weird front end. It was all style and it looked stupid. Now they've eliminated a lot of that and put more space into the passenger room, where I expect people will actually care about it more. All right, driving the new Lexus RX. Now, two quick things before I get started. Number one, this is a pre-production car. So people always watch videos I do in the rain and they say, you got the car all wet. This car will be crushed. It's a pre-production model. It will not be released to the world. The other thing worth mentioning, I already did a review of the new Lexus RX, but really it was just like a walk around to kind of show what was going on. Now I'm able to drive it, and so that's different, and hence the second video. So let's talk about the driving experience of this car. As you might expect, it's, well, exactly as you might expect. It drives like a Lexus RX. In fact, I always think it's funny when the automakers let us have a preview of the car and not drive it yet when it's something like this. It's not like the driving experience is going to be groundbreaking or earth-shattering, and indeed, that is not the situation here. It drives just as you would expect a Lexus RX to drive. We've had this car now for however many generations. They've all been fairly similar, and this one is no real difference. So what does that mean functionally? Well, it handles okay, predictably and nicely, but not like fast, speedily, excitingly in any way. It just handles as you'd expect, which is to say, fine. Steering, handling is all very predictable. There's a lot of body roll in corners if you go too hard through a corner. There's a lot of understeer if you go too hard through a corner. You know, this is the F Sport version, which is supposed to be like sporty and exciting, but at the end of the day, it's not all that sporty and exciting. It's a Lexus RX. It's intended to appeal to a mass market audience, not car enthusiasts. Now, I am curious how the RX 500h will be, and if that will be sportier and more exciting, more engaging, but this certainly isn't. With that said, one upgrade over the outgoing RX that I'm impressed with is the ride quality. I always felt the outgoing RX was fine, but not necessarily quite as luxury car as I felt it should be. There was more, you felt more body. It was a little bit rougher than I always thought it should be. This new one is a lot nicer. It's got a lot more comfortable ride than before. It feels very comfortable, more insulated from the road, over bumps, and just generally less sound, that sort of thing. So I think it's a little bit more calm and comfortable in here, but I wouldn't say it's sportier or anything like that. Other than those things that are worth mentioning, there's not much to this new Lexus RX in terms of driving experience to really differentiate it from the previous model or other kind of mid-sized luxury SUVs. This particular version is not what I would call fast. 270 horsepower, whatever it is, it's not a large number, and the engine feels pretty taxed when you really want to go for it. But it's the base model, and there are other versions with more power if that's what you're looking for. However, I suspect most people will end up with this, and they won't get that much performance out of it. It's just not a performance vehicle, and it's not a performance vehicle. It's not intended to be, and it is not delivered as one. But you do get all the boxes checked that people want in a mid-size luxury crossover. You sit up reasonably high. You have a comfortable ride quality, a comfortable interior, roomy in here. The visibility is not ideal in the Lexus RX because of the way the rear end kind of slopes down, but that's just the way it is. And you do have large mirrors and, of course, a lot of cameras and sensors and beepers to kind of make up for that stuff. But generally speaking, this vehicle drives like you would expect a Lexus RX to drive. It's not particularly engaging, interesting, entertaining, but it's very nice, very luxurious, and it's the default choice for a lot of people. And so as a result, they have to make it this way to be very appealing to a wide group of people, and it is, and it's good. And so that's the new 2023 Lexus RX. This is one of America's most beloved luxury SUVs, and now there's a new one. It's not exactly the most exciting or thrilling car in the world, but you will soon be seeing them everywhere. And now it's time to give the new RX a Doug score. And the Doug score is here, 54 out of 100, which places the RX here against rival luxury SUVs. It doesn't look like it performed very well, but that's because the Doug score is biased toward performance vehicles. In reality, the RX's daily score is right on par with many rivals, but because it isn't very exciting, it drops down in the weekend categories. Truthfully, the new RX is an excellent crossover, just not a particularly desirable one if you're a car enthusiast looking for something fun.